Put your hands top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
Your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on Pop Culture Minefield. We broadcast on YouTube and Rumble at 8 a.m. every Tuesday. That's 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every Tuesday. You know, I have another show that broadcasts on Wednesday, and it's on Rumble, and it also broadcasts on KJRDB.com, and that is Briefing with the Chief. I also have a Twitter handle, as you can see right under my name there, or formerly known as Twitter, now X, and that's at LASU Jordan. And I comment on a wide variety of issues. I obviously lean conservative. If you watch me there, I'm more right of center than deep conservative. But I've been doing this show for almost a year now. I'm coming up on a year. I think I only have a couple months to go, and it has been a blast. And today's show is going to be another Joseph Wambaugh movie. Now, I've done a few Joseph Wambaugh movies, and I remember reading these books as a kid. My dad was into them. My dad retired from the Detroit Police Department after 37 years. So I beat my dad. I did 38 years on the LA County Sheriff's Department. He retired as lieutenant, and he was big into reading Joseph Wambaugh books. And I ended up reading a lot of those books because, hey, you know, when you got a family with 5 other siblings and the TV gets taken over, you pick up a book and go read in your room, right? And I enjoyed those Joseph Wambaugh books. And one of the things about Joseph Wambaugh is he would write about the human condition for police officers. He presented police officers as human. He presented their vulnerabilities, and to some degree presented them as tragic figures at times and vulnerable figures at times. And I wouldn't necessarily say I got this out of the movie, but when I read this book years ago, that's what I came away with, just like I did with The Onion Field, which was based upon a true story, the murder of Ian Campbell, and the drama or the pain that Carl Hedinger experienced after that murder here in California, and that's why I really like Wambaugh, because cops get portrayed in so many different ways in the movies that they're completely unrealistic, but they are human, and that's why I like Wambaugh's writing. That's why I like some of his movies, and I wouldn't say I necessarily like this movie. But let me bring on. Oh wait, before I do that, I got to do my plug for the Los Angeles Mission. So, you know, I am on the board of the LA Mission. You can go to the losangelesmission.org. They serve over 400,000 meals a year to the homeless in downtown. And, you know, there's a race for DA, and the issue of the homeless, it keeps getting pushed up. And one of the things about criminal justice reform is it was supposed to bring equity for people of color, particularly Black people. And I just want to point out that I believe it's 40% of the people on the streets in Los Angeles and Los Angeles County are Black. And the demographic that is dying the most on the streets are Black males. So somehow, Prop 47 passed in 2014. Here we are 10 years later, and it hasn't really accomplished anything. We haven't seen the equity that they promised. And that's one of the reasons why I have a real problem with these policies put out by these leftists. And that's why I want you to support the LA Mission, because their strategies to meet the needs of the homeless in the streets, inclusive of cognitive behavioral therapy programs, which is the gold standard. If you're going to turn people's lives around, you have to implement some level of cognitive behavioral therapy programs. I know I've done it. It works. It doesn't work great, but it works better than what we're doing now. And it's an incremental improvement, which is what we should have been doing with criminal justice reform all along. But hey, let's get into our movie because it's a lot more fun. Even though I didn't necessarily like this movie, there are some funny parts to it, and we'll get into that. But let me bring on my first guest, and he's a guest we've had before, and that is Cliff Yates. Cliff is a retired sergeant from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and he worked with me in Hollywood for a long time. He was part of Hollywood. He was a stand-up comedian for a while. He retired as a sergeant from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, did a stint in upstate New York as well as a deputy. And so he has a variety of experience. He wrote a book, and he has his own podcast, and that is the Cliff Yates Show. It's on all the broadcasting channels, and he is testing the water on a variety of different subjects on his podcast. There you see it at the bottom of the screen, YouTube at Cliff Yates. Hey, how you doing, Cliff?
Fantastic, Pat. Thanks for having me on the show. And yes, I remember working with you in West Hollywood, the Sunset Strip. Ride the Strip, we pay the gas was an article I saw in Police Product News in 1977 when I was working in upstate New York. And I called the number 1-800-LASD. The rest is history. 30 years of, I say, great service with the largest sheriff's department in the world. And it's an honor to be on the show with you. And I'm glad we're doing this movie. It's one of the movies, as you always seem to pick, that really inspired me to want to go from my small town in upstate New York to a large metropolitan agency, which led me to the LA Sheriff's Department. So happy to be on the show with you.
Okay, well, I'm happy with me again, and I do appreciate you coming on. And the interesting thing is, working Hollywood, some of the shenanigans these guys get into in the show, we're consistent with some of what I joined. I was 21. We had a lot of 21-year-olds joining, and so you had some of this drama going on. But hey, let's say hello to Penny and some of the other folks that are joining us that are regular. Hey, good morning to you guys, and let's bring on our second guest. And this is his first time on the show with me. Now, he's been on when Cliff has done guest hosting gigs with me, and that is Ron Daly, currently a lieutenant, waiting for his retirement day to hit. He's at home with some injuries, and I'm glad to hear you're recovering a little better, Ron. And you know what, Joseph Wambaugh, did you read his books? Watch the movies? You like them?
I have not. Not really I'm not a big fiction guy, even though they may be written on or based on true stories. But I will tell you, a lot of people that I respect, that's their go-to favorite author. So I'm more of a nonfiction guy. I read quite a bit, especially now. Didn't have that appetite as a kid growing up and got it as an adult. But thanks for having me on the show. I'll be honest with you, Pat. I mean, we had met in the past very briefly, but Cliff co-signed for you. So Cliff said, hey, will you be willing to go on the show? And I go, well, with Pat doing it? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, he's a good dude. He goes, yeah, it'll be all right, man. It'll be good. So I was like, okay, tell you what, because you asked me, Cliff, to go on, Coffee with the Chief, I'll be willing to do it. So no, thanks for having me, Pat. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm working on another guest to come on, and I tell him it's pretty painless. This show is pretty painless, and I'm actually having fun because you know how when you retire, you disconnect from the department, disconnect from people, and things that were like I did 38 years, and we were talking a little bit about when did you actually join the sheriff's department, Ron?
1997.
1990. Well, so I was already.
Hey, so that's almost 27 years, sir.
I started my career in 1983. I did 38 years, and unfortunately, there was a divorce in there, which kind of extended that period. But yeah, so it's a little different generation, I think, is because Wambaugh. I think most people who were joined when I did, Wambaugh was big. So you watched his movie, you read his books. I know Cliff has read his books. And when I started doing this show, I knew I wanted to do some of his movies, like The Onion Field. I definitely wanted to do that. I did The New Centurions, which I think was a much better movie than this movie. And I remember reading the books. I wouldn't say I was inspired to go into law enforcement. I just remembered it answering some questions on what I saw around my house because I came from a family of law enforcement, right? A lot of drinking, a lot of stuff going on, and but it was also one of the reasons as I read these books, as Cliff would probably attest, I was more of a straight arrow, right? I avoided a lot of the stuff that you kind of see the drama in this stuff, and I remember working with a guy who was a big drinker, and I said, one night a week, dude, you got me one night a week, I'll go out drinking with you. Other than that, I'm going to work out, I'm going to school. And that was it. But hey, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're coming on. And I did watch, I think I watched one of the shows. I was in an airport watching you and Cliff talk about one of the movies, and I was chiming in, and I just appreciate you guys coming on. So you both watched the movie. Cliff, what'd you think of the movie?
Yeah, like you, I didn't a lot of it I didn't like, and we had talked off camera with Ron. It's like some of the language they wouldn't allow it today, right? So it was really street real, I guess.
Yeah.
But I was surprised. I didn't remember how the production value really wasn't that great in a lot of the scenes.
Oh yeah. I agree. I guess I should introduce the show. This was the Choirboys. It was released in 1977. It is a comedy drama. Now, I don't think when you wrote the book, because I remember reading the book years ago, that it was necessarily a comedy. It was
a
drama with some dark humor, and they wrote it. They kind of directed, and the director is Robert Aldrich, which some of his comments regarding the movie are, in my opinion, are despicable. I don't know if you got a chance to do some research.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, why does a guy who hates cops get to direct a movie about cops and trying to present them? Well, you heard my comments early on, Ron. So I think his work, I don't know if you've seen The Onion Field, if you've seen some of these books or some of his movies, they're about presenting law enforcement, the vulnerabilities of law enforcement officers, and to present them as just human beings doing some tough stuff. Have you seen some of his work, and do you agree with that?
Are we talking with Joseph Wambach or the director?
Joseph Wambach.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the Onion Fields, and I don't know if I've said this on any other podcasts, but I grew up in a law enforcement household as well. My dad did 30 plus years with the California Highway Patrol, and then bought property up near Northern California, and then became a Trinity County deputy. So before his untimely passing back in 2011, he had done like 49 and a half years in law enforcement. Wow. So I was familiar with a lot of those things, like the Newhall shooting where the CHP were involved, the Onion Field killings, etc. And I'm not familiar with the work, but I mean, even before I even decided to go into law enforcement, which, by the way, my mom loved when I told her I was doing that, but and I hope you sense my healthy sense of sarcasm there.
Yeah.
But I had already kind of seen, we'll just call it the buffoonery behind the scenes, as well as kind of the human side of it. And one thing that's unique about my dad, just to give him a little shout out, is that my dad as a rookie was in the 65 Watts riots, and then he was also in the 92 Rodney King riots before he retired and went to Trinity County. So I remember seeing huge reams of books, like photo books. I know all the cool kids don't do that anymore, of my dad and his guys taking photos being deployed during those, we'll just call it civil unrest.
Well, my dad was in the 68 Detroit riots. How's that? So covering the country. All right. So you had some riots up there in upstate New York, right? The pigs are getting out of hand right up there, Cliff.
Yeah, it's funny. My dad was, who I write in my book, Deputy, that he was a super cop. And I didn't really realize it until I went to LA, because here I was. My dad worked for the same sheriff's department that I ended up going to in 1978. And so he was known. So this is 50,000 people in this county, no cities, all villages and townships, upstate New York. The largest village when the college was in session had 10,000. And he actually got 3 Rolling Stolens in one night. Can you imagine? And I mean, that was big in LA if you could do that. So he did this in upstate New York. And I worked for the sergeant who was with him that night. And he said they had gotten 2 and they had parked at a corner, and 2 major thoroughfares, and a car pulled up to the red light. My dad goes, "Look at that. Those plates are tied on with purple ribbon. That's a stolen car." And they stopped. That was number 3 for the night. Can you imagine that? Oh my God.
I got off training, and this guy, I could tell that some of the older guys liked me, but it was about a month off training, and I got 10 Rolling Stolens in a week.
What?
And yeah, you had to know what you're looking for. I mean,
Wow.
if you saw a
Yeah,
male
but that's
prostitute in a car, it
amazing.
was stolen, right? And so of course he was needling my training officer. I mean, I was off training, and this guy was needling my trainer. Look what your trainee is capable of doing. He's out hooking you.
Man,
But I grew
good. That's good.
blue collar. So for me, coming to work was about work, and
Yeah.
that's what I did. I was pretty serious. Go ahead, Ron.
Hey, what's a rolling stolen? What is that? What is that, guys?
That means you're just rolling down the street and you run a plate and it comes back rolling stolen. I think you already know what that is, but you're making me explain that to the audience.
No, it's okay, Pat. I want you to appreciate my humor when I try to do it, but
no, that's a good toss-up. I like that.
You guys are talking about arrests and stuff, and I'm like, what are these things that you guys are talking about here?
I had somebody tell me years later when I was much higher up that they remembered that I was a good street cop, and I have to tell you, one of the worst things about going past lieutenant is you get disconnected from police work. I mean, it's not fun. You're just an administrator, and the few times as a lieutenant when you get to play, it's like, oh, this makes my week,
Yeah.
And I always felt being a street cop was a lot of fun because it was the cat and mouse thing, and catching the bad guy and working the hypes that are during the burgs. Those were all kind of fun things. But hey, on this show we have let me talk about the director a little bit, because as I did my review on this, one of the reasons why I felt he should have never directed it, Joseph Wambaugh was critical of him. In fact, Joseph Wambaugh bought the rights back to 2 books to make sure Hollywood, The Onion Field and I think The New Centurion. He bought the rights back because he didn't want them butchering his books in the future, and it received some negative comments. And this director, Ulrich, had a clash with him. And I'll just quote one of the things that he said. And I'm thinking, why the hell did they put this guy in charge? Ulrich said, the book doesn't go far enough for me. For instance, not showing them as racist, meaning cops, taking bribes. I mean, where did this guy grow? I mean, a bribe, really? And wanting to be stormtroopers. Yeah, that's right. This is what this idiot thinks of cops. I think they've got to show LA cops as brutal as they really are, and Wambaugh can't face that problem, so it's never touched in the book. So this is the morons in Hollywood. If I were to equate something, so we look at Weinstein. So for decades he preyed upon women in Hollywood. So does that mean that every single director and producer is a rapist and a pedophile? I mean, does that mean that? But this is what this idiot thinks of law enforcement. And that now it doesn't surprise me why. I'm not surprised now, understanding why the movie didn't measure up to the book, right? And that's part of the problem with how law enforcement is portrayed in Hollywood. Ron, I'll give you the first crack at that, and I want to hear what Cliff has to say.
Well, I mean, obviously the media or mediums of written word to cinematography, even though they're telling a story, is different. So I think that probably the director took some liberties. But yeah, in my readings of it as well, you could definitely tell that there was some creative conflict on how Joseph Wambaugh believed that police work should be portrayed and the human condition associated with it, relative to the director, where he is I'm not saying there isn't shades of that there, at least based on my experience, but he goes way overboard. And I don't think in the spirit of the book, he portrays that in the movie. And hence that's probably one of the main reasons why the author and the director had conflict. So there was parts of the movie where I thought it was pretty interesting and humorous at kind of the extreme end. That would be my comment on that, I guess.
Yeah, Cliff, you were part of Hollywood there a little bit. What do you think of the comment? And did you get kind of that attitude when the cop became a stand-up comedian?
I was really surprised that I was taking a class from a lady, Judy Carter, and I always like to separate the two jobs. So I would go do stand-up comedy, and then she was helping me write my material, and she goes, "Oh no, you have to." I go, "I don't want to tell people that I'm a cop." And she goes, "Oh no, you have to tell people you're a cop. You're going to be one of the few comedians that has a real life." to talk about. And so you have a unique niche. I really don't want to do that because of my own perceived negativity from the public. As a matter of fact, the Rodney King thing was going on. I go, I don't want to go up. I got to go up tonight at the Ice House. And this just happened on the news. And so, man, I never had a problem. Once I went on stage and I took control of the stage and people just were there to laugh. And man, I didn't really even have any hecklers at the time or, man, I was surprised at the lack of attack at the time that I had in 1992, 93. And so I didn't have any backlash that I had perceived was going to happen. So that was kind of weird. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know. I used to get this in Hollywood every now and then. I know you did it. Do you know who I am? And, my response was, yeah. You're the guy going to jail. That's who you are. But obviously there was usually somebody in Hollywood. And just the arrogance portrayed in that statement by him shows his complete lack of understanding of law enforcement and people in general. Because his description is one of somebody that's less than human, is the way I see it. See, civilians like me appreciate explanations that law enforcement jargon likes. Stolen Rollins. It's rolling stolens. Okay.
Well, they're dyslexic.
Okay. Yeah. It's you're right. We and Ron, that's his job, is to correct me and make sure I explain the jargon.
Well, hey, sir, I will never correct you, even in today's world. Okay, but I was just clarifying, something.
When you retired, just to be clear for all of us with their ranks and police, we are now has-beens, once wases, which means, we just give each other a little bit of, I don't know, deference just because we once were, but now we're just cops talking about stories, right? So one of the other things that was really cool in this movie, and they said it was an ensemble cast of really nobodies that were in the movie. So we had Charles Durney, who played the main guy, and I like him in a lot of the stuff
Me
that he
too,
does.
yeah.
Lewis Gossett Jr. that went on to have a great career. And Perry King. Now I remember him from some movies, but he was the good-looking guy. There was a good-looking guy like him at Hollywood, Cliff, and I think you know who I'm talking about. And I won't say
I wasn't that good-looking.
No, I wasn't saying it was you. No, it was somebody else. But we had guys like that, the pretty boys that were working the ladies all the time. And let's see Randy Quaid is in this movie. Plays kind of a goofy character here, and I loved him in the movie. Remember the movie The Long Riders, where the Quaid brothers were in it, and the Keach brothers were in it. It was an old movie from Western from the 70s, and there was another group of brothers in it. It was the Quaid, Keaches. I can't remember the other group, but good movie, and that's what I remember him from. And he went on to have a fairly good career. Cliff, anybody in the movie that you want to talk about? Oh, Burt Young. Yeah, I like him.
Yeah. How about Charlie Hade, Hill Street Blues?
Yeah, Renko. He played Renko in Hill Street Blues, and he was the desk sergeant here, right?
Yeah, and I also want to talk about who I thought did an awesome job in the onion field, James Woods, who's a conservative and supporter of the police.
I can't believe I didn't say James Woods in this thing, but yeah. So really good guys that went on to good careers, and I wouldn't say this is their best work, but hey, they had a really crummy director. I'll say it that way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Vic Tayback. Oh my God.
Vic Tayback. Which is funny, pulling the stunt on. I like the name.
The bathroom.
Roscoe Rules.
Roscoe Rules. Sperm whale whaling. Oh my God.
Yeah. And some of these other. Grimsley and Zuni and Foxy, all the different names they have for some of the characters in the movie. So obviously Wombat, I read, they said about this book that he actually found his comedic voice with this book, I guess is what they said about Wombat. So, and a lot of his stuff was pretty serious, but later on, you'll see in his later on writings, like I think I read The Glitter Dome, there's some dark comedy in that one as well. There's some dark comedy in this one. Even there's another true story. I think it's he wrote a book on Lines and Shadows.
Yeah,
and
I read that.
That one's about the border, and I think that one he has some dark humor in there. But then he also does some excellent true story stuff. Do you ever read the one, The Blooding? It was the first time they used DNA in a case in England. So if you get a chance to read that book, it's good because it talks about they had the whole town submit blood, and then they did DNA test on all of them, and it's a good book, and it's a true story. But anyway, so this is a movie. Let's go into our first scene, and I just call the first scene the Vietnam vets. So this is 1969, and we see a couple of our characters who go on to become LAPD officers in Vietnam. And one of the reasons why I felt this scene was important is because my dad told me. My dad started working. Let's see, let me think. So I was born in. So I think he started in 1959 in the city of Detroit. And one of the things he said was, "Oh, those Vietnam vets, they were a little crazy." So Vietnam was going on at the time, and so they hired a lot of these guys were hired right out of the military into the law enforcement services across the country. And so I thought this was important because one of the things I've talked about on this show and on my other show, Briefing with the Chief, is post-traumatic stress injuries that law enforcement suffer. And if we're getting people from the military, they also, I just don't think that in the 60s and early 70s, even in the 80s, that we really fully understood post-traumatic stress injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder. And we did get a lot of guys from the military who were probably suffering from that. And I think that gets displayed later in the movie. I don't know if you guys got a chance to work with guys that were Vietnam vets. I did, and they definitely, I don't want to say they had an attitude, but they had a different bearing about them, right? And they had expectations of their guys. Many of them were supervisors by the time we came on. I'm one guy. God, I think he was in Korea. I mean, Sergeant Billy Griffin. I don't know if you know him, but man, we were dealing with crowd control issue, and he had us all lined up in rank order, and we're marching to the federal building, just a dozen of us, and you can hear the din of the noise. And we had gotten together at the fire station nearby, and LAPD was kind of a gaggle. The CHP was kind of a gaggle, and he had us all lined up. I was the gas guy. I had the gas gun, the grenade launcher. And as we're walking in with our helmets and shields, because we had our stuff, they didn't, you can hear the crowd quiet down just as we approached. And so that's why, I like the military guys because they knew what needed to happen. They understood why the tactics were important. They understood how to have an impact quickly. And as we marched in, everything quieted down. He said, "All right, face." We all turned fairly in uniform. Cops aren't the most practiced at this, but enough to get the crowd's attention, and we cleared out the sidewalk and then put our skirmish line up, and it quieted down after we got there. So I really do appreciate the men and women in the military that come work for us, but if they've been in combat, they come with some challenges as well. What do you think, Cliff?
Yeah, I'll speak to that from two different perspectives. I'm working patrol in 1978, 21 years old in upstate New York. And a lot of my calls were really probably veterans suffering from PTSD. I kind of had a negative perspective at that point, but then coming on the LA Sheriff's Department, man, I was really exposed to a lot of great veterans who had a lot of military experience. It seemed like at the time, maybe I want to say most of our Aero Bureau ended up being former helicopter pilots that did time in Vietnam. They had a lot of hours working helicopters in Vietnam. Then I met a sergeant. God, I can't think of his name right now. And he showed me something. This guy, he was a sergeant at Temple. You might remember his name. Oh my goodness. When he wrote his story, he was involved in Vietnam where basically they rushed like a pillbox type thing where, I mean, everybody died around him. He was the only one that survived this thing. And then, I used to see him at funerals and he would say, "Why did I survive? And these guys didn't after all I've done." But he was, I met so many great veterans from that Vietnam era. So I had initially a perspective, kind of a negativity. I was dealing on calls and of people suffering from probably PTSD and drinking and drugs. And then coming on the Sheriff's Department, great military, veterans who had served in Vietnam, who went on to become pilots in our department and also just great leaders, I think.
Yeah. And what do you think, Ron? Same thing? And what do you think? Vets coming on right out of combat, PSTD?
Yeah. So, so I have a pretty extensive training background, I guess, on the department. So, all the way from the recruit level through in service. And when I was a drill instructor at the academy, the global war on terror was on and cracking, and I would say that I would probably venture to guess, and you guys could probably fill this in because it's a little bit before my time, is that my dad got drafted into Vietnam. I don't know if he saw combat or anything, but we had never really talked about it. But the difference between being a drafted forced force that had to go over and fight, and being a volunteer force where you raised your hand and said, hey man, I'm upset about this whole 9/11 thing. I'm ready to go, at least to where our government's pointing us that the people are responsible. I don't want to get into all that, but where they're like, hey, we want to go out and get some payback kind of thing. I think that those folks, at least the recruits I saw, very motivated in the training environment, extremely squared away, very mature.
Yeah.
I did work amongst some Vietnam vets, and they were kind of the older heads. And it was almost like that uncle at Thanksgiving that you would see every year, every 5 years. It'd just be like, hey, Uncle Johnny's kind of different. Just kind of leave him alone. He's going to
Yeah.
say some things. And they were kind of at a different level. But I would say that overall, I would say if I ever had a criticism of somebody on the department, it wasn't because they were a vet in their combat experience. It just happened that they had been in the military. But otherwise, I kind of share the same opinion as Cliff, that like those people were ahead of where I would want to be as it relates to understanding things. So when I went to the academy, for example, good spot. I thought I was pretty squared away. I had one of my guys that was a best friend of mine. He pulled me aside. He's a Marine, and he dressed me down, like, not tough love, but we went down to my trousers, everything, my shoes, everything, and he showed me like how to wear a uniform like a Marine.
Yeah.
And I was always known for how sharp my stuff looked, and it was because of him. So I would say that those guys were extremely squared away, had a high attention to detail. One thing I will say, if I'm going to be 100% candid and honest, is off duty. My guys tended to get in trouble, So I can tell you, we separated more than one recruit for alcohol related incidents, etc. And that was part of our culture. I don't know what they're doing now, but drinking was part of the culture per se, But other than that, I hold all those guys in really high regard, and girls.
I do too, and I think just we need to make sure they get the appropriate treatment if they've seen combat, and because I think they add, a great deal to law enforcement because of their military background and training, which we just can't match at the civilian environment. And I'll have to admit, I wasn't the best guy in the academy on uniform, but those guys in the military, they knew how to get them damn shoes shined and all that. They were great at that stuff, and the whole marching stuff. I resented all that stuff. It's like, can we get this stuff over? I just need to get out there and work and make some money, right? But let's bring up the next.
Here's the thing, Pat, is that if you remember when you said you went to the civil disturbance, none of the bad guys were paying attention until the guys came up at a route step in formation, squared away.
I know.
So I'll just offer that.
I'm saying I hated it, but I understood the value of it. Listen, I can do both of those things, but yeah, and this guy, he was. It was funny because it told me, okay, and I used, I used that stuff later on when I was a lieutenant now running, doing protests at the federal building. I made sure my guys were squared away. I made sure they had their stuff. I used skirmish lines. I didn't play around. And when you came like you meant business, what's that? One riot, one ranger. When you came with a small group, but you looked like you knew what you're doing, they paid attention. And I learned that from him and used it down the road. So that's where I say it's valuable. So let's go to roll call. This is my next scene. And I really like this scene because you get to see all the characters in one room, right? And it's interesting how they do have, here I am, an executive. They do have some angst for the executives and the lieutenants and the, we did have some lieutenants who thought a lot of themselves that were a little bit like this, but I just like all the characters in the room because that is what a roll call is like. It is a group of different men and women coming together, and you're going to have the old guy like this who's going to speak up, and then I'm going to call him Wrinkle because that's what he was in the Hill Street Blues, right? And the sergeant there, and he definitely knows how to control his briefing, which I liked about that, and they listened to him, which I I just like that whole dynamic. They're screwing around. This guy's going to play Dracula here. I would say that's probably a little over the top. I don't think I saw quite that much going on in briefing, but I liked how the sergeant let it go a little bit, and then he pulled it under control when he had to, right? And the guys respected him for that. What do you think, Cliff?
Yeah, I like that. It kind of realistic reflected how the culture of coming together, and we have this briefing, and there's different characters and personalities, and then we all go dispersed our separate ways to go do the Lord's work. So in that respect, it was kind of accurately depicting how it goes.
Well, but you also had guys that were a little stuck on themselves, thought highly of themselves, and then you guys who were just kind of laid back, all right, here he is again. And then the language in the room, which we can't get away with now, I think they called Louis Gossett Jr. the gook, and the spook and the gook is what they refer to him in the movie. Oh my God, if that happened in a briefing now, we'd have 10 IA guys down interviewing everybody. It's out of control. So you don't get to have that loose kind of banter like we used to have in briefing. I don't know if this might have actually predated Ron. Ron, they kicked off equity training in, I think I want to say 92 or 93. So I can tell you from experience, I think Cliff can too, that the briefings were a little looser.
Yeah.
Prior to 1992. So what'd you think of this scene?
I liked it, a little over the top, but yeah, you get a chance to see the characters and everything else. And I will tell you, I can remember working the Inmate Reception Center, or IRC, as a young deputy, and A-lads coming in and talking about the policy of equality and how it was going to have to pass. And there was really nothing we could do about it. But I can remember, like, as a young deputy, right, wrong, or otherwise, not having kind of the constraints that they do now, and folks getting to make them better and a better team player, getting kind of dressed down, for lack of a better word, and in front of everybody, and it was to correct them so that everybody else saw that this wasn't kind of the standard we were going to set or behavior we were. But I will say, having been kind of separated from the department for a minute now, is this scene reminds me of, I don't miss the circus, but I miss some of the clowns, is how I've heard it described. And
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah, so like in seeing these guys, I can see a little bit of myself in a lot of these folks. But then I can also immediately, like when I saw Sperm Whale or Whalen, I was like, that is so and so, or so and so from my time on the department at patrol. And having, as we've gone up in rank and stuff, having been the deputy and then kind of been the new guy, the middle guy, the senior guy, and then ultimately becoming a supervisor and led these kind of briefings, I remember what I'd liked, what I didn't like, and I tried to ensure those things occurred in briefing. But I can definitely, even sitting, LAPD kind of sets their stuff up different. Everywhere I've been, it's been more of like a round table or a, kind of around the room type thing. And the new folks sat in a certain spot, the medium folks sat in a certain spot, the head guys sat in a different spot. We didn't have kind of this auditorium seating that you see in the scene there. But I can remember all the guys would talk and be messing around, but it would be more of like politicking, to the point where we would be like, this has to be said. Somebody has to say it. Hey, Cliff, you're the guy, dude. You're the senior guy. You got to throw yourself on the sword. And you see that in the movie later on as well. And then as I'm the sergeant receiving that, you're kind of like, okay, man, I get it. If Cliff's talking or this dude's talking, it's probably coming from the vast majority of the folks, as opposed to just somebody talking smack or talking crap or, acting out of emotion. But I'll be honest with you, these scenes were probably some of the ones that I stopped being the roll call ones, if we're calling that, or briefing scenes, where it reminded me most, I mean, barring the language and stuff, some of the stuff you'd never hear in at least in my era, reminded me most of my time on the department. All the drinking and parks and ducks and everything else they were doing, not so much my experience, but this I could really end up in my mind of visualizing back in my era.
So this lieutenant, I think he's seeing his second bar already, and they kind of they're kind of Now, I'll tell you, I have a little bit of a rebel streak that you guys aren't aware of because I kept it all to myself over the years. We had a lieutenant like this at West Hollywood before he got there, Cliff. Maybe you were there. I can't remember now. But he wanted us all to write 2 citations a day. You guys have to write 2 citations a day. And I was the straight arrow on the ship. I was the guy who did what I was supposed to do. I didn't really make a lot of waves. And, they liked me, but I printed out the section of the vehicle code that said you can't require
Have a quota. That's correct. Yeah.
And I handed it to him, the next day. I said, Lieutenant, I think maybe you ought to read this.
Yeah.
And let's just say he got, well, it's just a goal. It's just this. But he wanted everybody to write 2 tickets, and he was really working hard to get promoted. Now, he wasn't really mean about it, but like this guy was a little bit narcissistic in the movie, but he was definitely, it was about him. Well, the city would like us to write more citations, and I think all of you guys can write 2 a day. So that's what I want you to do. And, then he did something else. You remember they wanted everybody to donate, right? You donate during that season to the,
yes.
And you remember that? And most people, I got to explain this to the audience because so what they would say about the sheriff's department and the district attorney's offices, they did not give as much as the other departments, the other county departments. And there's this charitable giving campaign, and they expected everybody to give. They wanted everybody to give. But here's how this worked. The Board of Supervisors picked the charities. And so they would pick the charities that benefited them the most in their districts politically. And then the county employees would make their donations. So who got the benefit for all those donations? The politicians. I didn't like that. And I didn't like the accusations that law enforcement doesn't give, because I went to church every Sunday and I gave. And there was this great program through the Catholic Church called Together in Mission, in which the wealthier parishes helped to fund the poorer parishes. And if you were working Compton or South LA and you saw some of those Catholic schools, guess where the money came from to help keep those schools going? They came from the wealthier Catholic parishes like mine. And so to have the Board of Supervisors and the leaders on the county say that the sheriff's department didn't give, because some of the most giving people are Republicans or conservative and police officers, but they give to the charities they want to give to, not to the charities of the county.
Yes.
So he was pushing all of us to donate $25 so he could be 100% on his shift. And why do you think he was doing that? Do you think he was doing it because he cared about those charities? No, he was doing it for his career, and I was the lone holdout.
Yeah.
I said,
Wow.
I give every week, dude. I give, $20 every week to the church. I mean, so I'm giving way more than these guys give, and I don't like the attitude. Anyways, that was my rebellious streak against those type of lieutenants. But that's what that lieutenant reminded me of. I don't know if you guys had guys like that as lieutenants. But the other thing I noticed in this show is, I don't use the scenes in the movie here, but they have a choir practice. The sergeant throws it. That's kind of unusual. Usually the sergeant's not going to throw a party, and he calls them choir practice. They had a couple. I guess there was the Hadleys. There was a female officer. They called her No Balls Hadley. And one of the other things, and I don't know if you noticed this, Cliff, was cut off shorts. Now that is so 70s, right? Do you remember the scene?
Of course.
At least one of those guys was wearing cut off shorts. And I mean, I wore them in the 70s.
I know I did. Yeah.
But yeah, cut off shorts, and it's always funny when you see some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then now the first Dirty Harry movie, or no, it was the second one. It was with Chico. So maybe it was the first one. It was the first one when he had the Latino partner, right? It was it was Dirty Harry, right? And he said something in that movie that these guys used as well. And it's basically, hey, don't worry about Roscoe hates everybody. Remember that scene from Dirty Harry? Oh, don't worry about Harry. Harry's not racist. He hates everybody. And they kind of use that line in this movie as well, which is you see writers they cherry pick scenes or cherry pick items from other movies and use them in our movie. I don't know if you caught that, Cliff. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I caught that. I haven't even heard that bantered around the department. He's not biased. He hates everybody.
So do you still have your old cutoff shorts in your drawer?
No, I got rid of them, and I gave them to a local thrift store. And I did that in California, so I got the write-off, and it's all good. Yeah.
Now they just keep the pants and they just cut holes in them.
Can you imagine that? They create old jeans and that's the style. It's like, what?
And they cut holes in them. Yeah. Ron, were you grew up past the cutoff eras, right? You had hem lines on your shorts. No cutoff shorts for you?
So I will tell you, just because my generation, we always tend to, try to do a little bit better, and then it comes full circle. We had jorts, jean shorts.
Yeah.
And if you remember jorts, and then you would like cuff them right at the bottom.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you would take the one cuff and you would cuff it right at the bottom. And then there was like this leather braided belt you would wear with it. And it would be extra long so you could tuck it under so that part of the belt was hanging out, almost like you would see the cowboys from the Tombstone movie where their sash.
Yeah.
That's how you wore your belt. And that's like what all the cool kids did, that we didn't realize we were dorks at that time. We thought we were cool, but I was all in it. But where jorts became really, really, really fabulous was when Brett Favre got drafted, and he was laying on his bed when he actually had the phone to his ear and they showed the camera, and he's laying on his bed while he's taking the phone call from the owner of the team he was drafted from, which at that time was the Atlanta Falcons, and he was wearing jorts. And so a little bit of sports trivia there.
So I had 5 siblings, and my assumption that cutoff shorts came from, okay, you grew out of your jeans, but the waist still fits, so we're just going to cut them off and you're going to wear them as shorts, right? That's what I think happened, and that made a fashion statement. Kind of like the gangsters when I first started working, the only people who were wearing sagging pants were the gangsters. Then rap became big, and then suddenly everybody's wearing sagging pants. I mean, even the white kids in the suburbs are wearing them, and it's like, I mean, I can understand the sagging pants because it was hand-me-down pants. The guys had big pants because they got the brothers' pants and all that other stuff. That was what was going on in the hood, and then rap hit the thing, and suddenly that became a fashion statement and a fashion style, and you still see it, guys with their pants riding really low. It's like, well, can you get some better looking underwear if that's what I got to look at? But it's just
art imitates life, Pat. And if you remember the Michigan Fab Five, they were the first dudes in basketball back in the 90s there to wear the big baggy shorts. Otherwise, I never played basketball, but in my head, along with the cutoff shorts coming in, for his shift, like Cliff wearing them, I could see Cliff in his basketball days wearing Chuck Taylors and his John Stockton high type things. I don't know that anybody will be able to get that out of their mind.
I think that's the University of Michigan, right? The Fab Five.
That was Michigan. Fab Five with Steve Fisher as the coach, and they were the ones that brought it. And art imitates life, or sports imitates life, and that's kind of with that whole hip hop push and everything during that era that I think all that stuff kind of started to come out.
Well, I'm born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Left at 19, so I definitely I'm real happy Michigan won today. And look at Jim Harbaugh's coming to coach the Chargers out here in Los Angeles. This should be interesting. There's a culture clash. A conservative Michigan coach coming out to coach the Chargers, where we have Sodom and Gomorrah here in LA. Let's get into the next scene, and this is Jumper. And, it seems like a lot of cop shows, they have a jumper scene. Cliff, I think I did Fort Apache, the Bronx with you, right?
Yeah.
They had a jumper scene in there.
Yep,
I think
they
Mel
did.
Gibson had a jumper scene with him. And so they have a lot of these different jumper scenes. And, of course, Roscoe Rule gets there, and Randy Cage tells him to back off. But this guy's he's going to do whatever he wants, and he basically encourages this person to jump, which they do. Now, I dealt with jumpers, but usually after they splatted, I never really had to try and talk somebody down. And we don't have that many places. Most of our areas are suburban.
Yeah, they did have several in West Hollywood off the hotel there next to the Comedy Store. And it was funny, Alba, with my wife, was on a couple of them. For some reason, 2 of them, these are separate suicides. And for some reason, they took their shoes off. I don't know why they did that. Have you ever heard of that?
Well, I have not heard them taking their shoes off. And by the time they jumped, remember, was it the 9200 building on Sunset?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so I don't know how they were able to get up onto the roof, but they would get up onto that thing. And it was 20 stories or 25 stories.
Yeah.
There wasn't much left by the time they hit the ground. But I can't imagine what I would do trying to talk them down. How do you slow it down enough for for our hostage negotiators to get there, people to talk to them, to get there, to talk them down. And of course, this was more dark comedy, I think, was this scene was all about than reality. Did you ever have to deal with a jumper, Ron?
No, definitely like 902A or attempt suicide calls where you would show up and they're, everything from, a naked black man with an erection lathered in feces to a lady with a knife to her throat, but never a jumper. But same kind of, I guess, if you're going to talk tactics and strategy, same general principle as it relates to tactical science, but, different nuts and bolts, but never a jumper.
Thanks for that visual. And
That was only for you, Cliff.
and then the callback of nuts and bolts.
Hey, Cliff, I knew a true stand-up comedian would appreciate those little nuggets that I threw in there. So
yeah, thank you, by the way.
You bet.
Yeah, one of the said, yeah, splattered. So I guess that was probably irreverent when I said that, when they hit the ground. You have to understand, when they go down 25 or 30 floors, they're just unrecognizable, and they do splat because you're, what is it, 85% liquid, right? Your body. And so when you hit the ground, the skin is not holding you in anymore, and it is ugly, And I think they passed legislation. They passed an ordinance in the city of West Hollywood that they had to secure the doors to make it harder for people to get to the roof. I think that's what happened, because we were having a lot of them there for a while, and then they passed legislation. No explanation required. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm just trying to give a little clarity to the audience that is what happens. It is. It's not fun to see. And I will, after a while, I did not go to those calls if I didn't have to go to those calls. I didn't want
me
to.
neither.
I didn't need the visual. Let the guys handle it. There really wasn't, other than traffic control on Sunday on Sunset, there really wasn't a need for anybody else to go there. And okay, and the next scene is the girls, and I kind of want to get into this scene. So I worked 11 years in West Hollywood, and we had the Sunset Strip. So there was a lot of good-looking girls there. They had the Body Shop, which was a popular place for the deputies. Ron, I don't know if you know the Body Shop. It was a strip club, high-end strip club, right on the Sunset Strip. And the girls liked having a boyfriend who was a deputy. In fact, when I first started working there, somebody started dating one of the girls, and they became an item, and they actually got married, and she left the Body Shop. But I also know of probably 5 deputies I could name, and I won't name them, who got caught up in that scene because it started with the girls, and then it moved on to the usage of coke. For some of them, but they just got themselves in trouble in this scene. And when I see this scene where this guy? Yeah, right here is Perry, right? What's his name? I just saw some of those guys getting enthralled with these beautiful women on Sunset Strip and mixing it up with people they shouldn't be mixing up with. And
that happened. Yeah, that happened.
That happens. Like, I can think of 5 people that got fired because of that kind of stuff, and it went the wrong direction. And of course, this guy, later on, we find out how it impacts him. But that's a hazard of working the job, whether it's on the Sunset Strip or actually in any community, right?
I know of a friend, when he was on his way back from the city of West Hollywood to the Universal, they used to stop in there as a property check, right?
Yeah.
In uniform for a cup of coffee. And then somebody gave that person the word, hey, just so you know, the feds are in there watching. You might not want to stop in there anymore. And that stopped that real quick. Whether it was true or not, I'm pretty sure it was probably, because I think the Russian mafia owned that place.
Well, I can't confirm it. I can't confirm it, Cliff, but I had heard that Pat's podcast was named Coffee with the Chief for that reason. But I can't confirm or deny that. I'm just hearing that.
No.
That's what I heard too. Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Hey, this guy here, he allegedly he went to a Jesuit boarding school. Here, a guy that is overcome by the sexual. And I did 12 years of Catholic school, but trust me, I didn't have to make up for lost time by going to the Body Shop. I actually spent a lot of my time just working hypes and working regular crooks, but there were a lot of guys who liked to work the strip because of the ladies, right? They were there, and And there was a lot of eye candy. I can remember working the Sunset Strip, and you just get flashed just because you were the cop.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
And they could flash you. What are you going to do, right? Take them to jail? Of course, you're not going to do that. And then you had the hair bands and all the hanger-ons hanging out. You're running around. I guess I need to clarify. So the Sunset Strip has the Roxy, the Rainbow, the Whiskey A Go Go. At the time, they had Scandias. I'm trying to think of the other
the Viper Room, the
Viper Room, and I think some of those, a lot of those still exist. And if you were going to try and hit the music scene, you had to hit it big on the Sunset Strip, and you had to be seen on the Sunset Strip. And the girls who were interested in those guys also came to the Sunset Strip, and because they were hoping to, I don't want to say hook up, but that's probably what it was. Hook up with some of the because we had Guns N' Roses running around at that time. We had Poison running around, and then you had some of the older artists would come back and do a nostalgia tour to some of the old clubs. So you had some big name rock and rollers, but the ladies were there, and they were always a hazard for the cops. Ron, did you see this during your career? The ladies being a hazard for your peers?
Yeah, so I can tell you, like I previously said, I don't know if we were on tape, but my dad was in law enforcement, and he said, and even though this won't be a politically correct term, he said it was the 3 Bs. So when he was like, hey, dude, this is what's going to get you in trouble: booze, broads, and bills. And I added bullets, but that was my own experience. But I'll tell you a funny story. So like when I worked patrol, our contract city was Linwood. And when you were a new deputy, you would go to Linwood and patrol one-man car, right? Because obviously another city's paying for it. You're not going to put 2 people in there because that would be too safe, and productive. So they'd put one as more like you're going to be like visually seen and everything else. Well, Long Beach Boulevard, the major north-south thoroughfare running through there, that's where a lot of the ladies of the night rolled prostitution-wise. And the really good-looking ones, and I would say everybody has their vice. I saw a comment in there. Everybody has their vice, whether it's money that gets you tripped up, whether it's girls, whether it's violence. One of those you're going to get wrapped up into where you're going to have issues with, or it's going to be a challenge, I guess, for lack of a better word. And it was never women on duty for me. It never was. But you would drive through, and when you got north of Imperial Highway, between Imperial and King, or what was Century Boulevard, later became King Boulevard,
they were not women. Yeah,
the girls got really good looking. Like you were like, dude, that's high level. Well, what we referred to them, or I should say this, what I heard they were referred to was we would call them Transformers, because the Transformer movie was out. And the really good looking prostitutes were actually dudes.
Guys. Yes, that's correct.
But they were the best looking ones. And I was like, I mean,
me and my partner argued, and I bet against him. I go, that is not a guy, dude. That is not a guy. And then one day he got shot, and his junk was revealed in the streets. And I go, I lost that bet. I can't believe it.
And how long did you date that one, Cliff? And you never even knew. No, I'm kidding.
That wasn't my temptation either.
What else is funny is when I was at Lenox before it closed, I was a sergeant there at patrol, and they had the jet strip right over the wall to the parking lot.
That's right.
And I can tell you, I've heard that deputies would get off duty and they wouldn't even try to go out and around and walk. They would just hit the wall. They would just hit the wall and go right over and hang out at the jet strip before they went home, or hit the bunk room, or whatever it was they were doing. But we had the jet strip. There was some places out in Centuries RD that was like down south. I don't remember like any of their names, but that wasn't my. I mean that honestly, Cliff. I'm being.
No, me neither. That wasn't my temptation either. Yeah.
But they were like way down south, and the areas that I worked, I don't think the clientele would have been like, in my wheelhouse, I guess, for lack of a better word. But there were some of those out there. But yeah, I can distinctly remember one guy that I worked patrol with, 2 guys, as a matter of fact, now that I think about it, that got wrapped up in on duty, that picked up kind of under the color of authority rape and or inappropriate sexual assault stuff. And I never really understood that. So that's one of the reasons why, at least in that area, I tried to keep, my ego in check and everything like that. But that wasn't anything that I pursued. I would like to think I had more to offer than just picking some chick up off the street, and had more value than that. But that's it. And That's my in a nutshell. But yeah, the prostitution thing out in Linwood was a very interesting.
Yeah, they would come in from all
experience.
over and work there. Yeah.
Oh, they would ship them in, and you would be
Yeah.
like, "That's an out of town girl."
Correct. Yeah.
And that brings,
Definitely.
so I mean, we got rid of, in this state, we got rid of loitering with intent to commit prostitution, which has caused an explosion of prostitution now in the state. And suggesting that cops were just harassing people. I just need to add on the Transformers more than meets the eye. So it is really appropriate, that saying. And I think it's time for a break. Martine, are we ready to go for our break? You got a couple of minutes here if you guys got to go potty?
Yes.
All right, Martine, take it away.
To break.
Meet the Seattle Vigilante. Like so many comic heroes, this warrior hides his identity. But his identity isn't the only secret he has to keep. After grievous wounds received during combat, Tier 1 operator John Russell begins to recover and comes to terms with his new reality of being an amputee. And as he learns how to use his new prosthetic limb, he finds himself caught up in the bureaucratic red tape that too many wounded veterans experience, the exhausting medboard process. Out of sheer frustration, John takes it out on the criminal scum of the city. But when reality kicks in, John realizes he started something that's having an impact on the greater world around him, and thus has to reevaluate his motives. And moreover, just how far is John willing to go to finish this war he's declared against the criminals in Seattle? And will he even survive? From the creator of IDW's award-winning graphic novel Code Word Geronimo comes a new story about a different kind of warrior, Vindicated Inc., the first of its kind disabled veteran action hero comic. The Vindicated Inc. graphic novel crowdfunding campaign on fundmycomic.com is provided in the description of this video. We hope you become a contributor. Please share this link. Thank you.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all. Movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis. Official scoops from Geekosity magazine. Reviews and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield. Well, they're always talking nerdy nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
Welcome back to Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm here with Cliff Yates and Ron Daly. We just had a discussion about deputies or police officers getting caught up in one of the hazards of the job, and that is sex and women. And we also discussed transgenders or transformers and what we used to call them. And here's the thing about this. I can tell you that those that are involved in the sex trade are victimized at a much higher level than anybody else. It's one of the reasons why we have to try and stop the sex trade, because these folks are vulnerable. They get hoodwinked into the stuff. They get hooked on drugs. And whether they're transgendered, male, or women, law enforcement at times is the last stop in trying to get them off the streets and make them safe. And one of the other things that I'll talk about when they talk about the LGBTQI and all that other stuff, if you worked in West Hollywood, one of the things that you took personal pride in was going after those folks who bashed people just because they were different. I mean, I made some pretty good arrests, and I don't, bully's a bully for me, and it doesn't matter who you're targeting. That was one of the reasons why I enjoyed the job, because I got a chance to put some of those bullies in jail. And we might have a little bit of fun here and there as we talk about people and how they might be a little different than us, but we all take it very seriously that there's a line that you don't cross, and assaulting people just because they're different is one of them. I don't know. I think I had to kind of say that, guys. I don't know what you guys think of that, but I think a lot of people that are involved in sex trade are in a terrible situation, and I think that the state is lifting the rules, and more people are being trafficked than ever before. I don't know what you think about that, Ron. You're most recently out of the mix. What do you think?
Yeah, well, one thing is I'm not saying it didn't sit well with me, but it's the same problem that they've had historically for years. I mean, they almost say it's the oldest profession, but when they recoined the term from prostitution to human trafficking or sex trafficking and stuff, I thought it was more of a play just to get funding and money. I mean, the same problem's been there, but like you said, they're still just passing laws and doing things and legislation that is almost enabling
Yeah.
this deal, and yet they're using all these flowery, fluffy terms and descriptors and adjectives. And from the outside looking in, I don't see it making an impactful difference with regards to what's actually happening on the streets. I don't know what the stats show. I'm not that well practiced in it, but that's just my 2 cents on it as it relates to that. But yeah, it's not a victimless crime. I wouldn't say that. And from a personal standpoint, in the spirit of kind of bringing this human side of police in, none of that stuff really bothered me as it related to people being out on the streets and stuff until my wife and I started dating, and she had a 7-year-old daughter. And that's when like things like, 288s or sex crimes against kids or something, all of a sudden I was like, "Er." And now that I have another daughter going on 13, those things tend to, like you said, I hate a bully. I anybody that's like victimizing other people for their own benefit, or satisfaction, or gratification, whatever it is, that injustice for me, like in here, like starts kind of a little bit of a fire. I won't call it anger, but it definitely gets my attention. So it's not a victimless crime, but that crime never really bothered me until I was until I got in the relationship with my wife. And then I had a stepdaughter that I treat as my own, that was always my own. And then we adopted a daughter later in life as older parents, where now all of a sudden if it starts talking about young ladies and girls and whatnot, that strikes a whole different chord for me nowadays as a dad.
Yeah, well, I think when they pick them off the bus stop, or they lure them in, and then you hear, like you said, at Linwood Boulevard, they're from out of town, right? They're trafficking them around. They can't get in. They can't get out of the life, and they're hooked. And I just think that sometimes law enforcement was that final ray of hope, by arresting them and putting them in the system and hopefully giving them service, because there were people out there trying to work with the community and get them out. But people are enriching themselves off these gals, and sometimes boys, and it's become normalized or justified. I like when they changed it to trafficking, because it placed the burden of this crime not on the prostitute, but on the person who's benefiting from the prostitute. And I like that change in language. But by getting rid of some of these sections, like alerting with intent to commit prostitution, I think some people in the state want to normalize this as real work, and that's where I have a problem with it. And because, as we've seen with Harvey Weinstein, all bets are off. It's all about sex, and they don't really care who they exploit. What do you think, Cliff? Do you think I'm just preaching a little too much there, or we moved away from protecting people that we should be protecting? This way I see it.
No, and that there was a time when that would make sense to talk about that as a big problem, and now you can't even. And now we're to the point. It's almost. I mean, since now the ship is sinking. Now we're in a culture of, especially out in California. Now we're not enforcing resisting arrest, stealing under $1,000. We are letting criminals out. And now it's like, why even talk about that? I mean, we're on fire. So it's almost, I don't know. And then if you want to go that route, as far as human trafficking, you're going to have to go down the rabbit hole of these millions, and unfortunately, America is the #1 consumer of these child pornography and kidnappings. Yeah. Where are these kids? They're gone. No one knows where they're at. So it's almost like we're shoveling sand back into the ocean. I don't know. We've lost control of law and order because everything is racism. And so you can't, that's the only answer you're allowed to give through disparity. You cannot have meritocracy and diversity at the same time. So sorry. I don't know. It's just it's gone too crazy.
One of the things
can I add to that?
Please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to get it canceled, so I won't say the exact name. Okay. But I'll say it rhymes with like Epstein Island because it's the newest thing. The Weinstein thing's more adjudicated, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Right.
But you have that ongoing thing where the number of folks that are so abundantly involved in this, and we'll just call them power brokers, media moguls, whatever it is. And if they're not blinded, you know, if you want to call it spiritually, they're being blinded by it. They're definitely calculated, turning a blind eye to it. And how people get prosecuted and jailed and sentenced for trafficking without any sort of how shall we say, end users involved or named. For me, just as I would like to think somewhat of a rational human being that's willing to see both sides of it, even though I lean a certain way, that's almost like a slap in the face to your intelligence, at least for me, where I'm like, I don't even want to hear what you have to say anymore. And I'm talking the legal system or anybody, mainstream media, because I'm like, you're throwing stuff out that is so wrong fundamentally on so many levels.
Fundamentally, yeah.
That you look, and I guess it's the adage, if you just say it enough times over and over again and get the main tellers of the story to keep saying it over and over again, we'll get enough of the population to believe it or at least tolerate it, and therefore we get what we want. I don't know, but I look at it and you want to talk about checking out, unplugging. Yeah, I still have cell phones. I still have Wi-Fi. I still have that. But otherwise, the second I even start to see one of those folks that represents any of those other, entities that you want to fill in the blank, I just check out. And the Epstein one, as it relates to human trafficking, especially of kids, they're etc. of it, and you have all these huge conglomerates, money conglomerates, paying these secret sealed settlements with these folks, and you're like, why would JP Morgan, well, I don't want to say names, why would this particular and multi-trillion-dollar entity be paying these folks money on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein to silence them or settle their case? So I'll get off my soapbox on that, but I'm kind of like, why are we not dealing with that? I mean, granted, we were talking street level crime earlier, and then we got to Weinstein with a little bit of Hollywood where, we'll just call it quid pro quo-y type stuff.
Yeah.
And now we're getting to the point where kids are getting recruited, and instead of them getting picked up on the street, they're thrown on jets or flown or taken to private houses, and these things occur. And I'm not saying it's okay, but it's like, oh, well, that's not the same as the street level kind of stuff. And, I guess if you have money or a certain name, you get away with it.
You bring up one of the themes in Olive Wambaugh's book is the futility. That, he kind of lays out the futility of what they're doing and how that it impacts the police officers who are going out doing, and they feel like they're just shoveling sand against the tide, right?
Right.
And so that is in the book, and the interesting thing is I can understand that working in the 80s. I mean, I hit the streets in 85, right? The belief in that, because crime was significantly higher in the 80s and early 90s, and it started to slide down from 94 till 2014. Now it's sliding back up again, and they've taken away the rules that we used or the laws that we used to help get it under control. And I can see where our troops now, the men and women in law enforcement now, are dealing with that same level of frustration and futility, where they're not appreciated, and the laws don't allow them to actually solve the problems, whether we're talking about sex trafficking or child trafficking or whatever it is, that they're having laws taken away from them, like loitering with intent to commit prostitution, which was taken away, which was pushed by Scott Wiener up north, who said that the cops are harassing transgender. It's one of the reasons why I brought it up. He provided no evidence of that, just his statement, and the liberal Assembly and Senate went along with it, and they got rid of it. Yet advocacy groups were arguing, and when I say advocacy groups, I mean groups that saved women from being trafficked, said, don't do this. For many of us, our pathway out of that life was that one arrest that took us off the streets. He ignored him. The liberal Democrats up in Sacramento ignored him, and we got rid of it. So that's why I kind of bring that up. And I also think that it is a theme in Wambaugh's book, because he wasn't just telling stories. He was talking about the frustration of what was going on at the time, the high crime of the 70s, 80s. Because our highest number per capita of murders in California was 1980, and it was 14.4 murders per 100,000 in California. The next highest peak came in 1993 with the crack epidemic. And then we did a long slide downward to 2014 before we passed Prop 47. It was 4.4. Now we're back up to 5.7. I did the math. That's 2,200 dead people since 2014, thanks to these criminal justice reforms. And where's the equity and all that? Okay, I'm getting that's for my other show. I'm getting on my soapbox here, guys. Okay, so Vice. Since we're talking about Vice, let's show that scene, Vice, and they go and they work with Dom, and this is where we see Burt Young. And he's a great character actor. We saw him in Rocky, but we've seen him in a variety of shows. He was in The Sopranos. I don't know if you remember seeing him in Sopranos. He played this old gangster. I think he came out of prison and he was sick, but they gave him a job, and he went and did a murder for the Soprano, for Tony Soprano, and he ended up having asthma, ended up dying, having a heart attack and stuff like that. But he went all the way into where he played a character actor in Sopranos. So hey, let's show those scenes there. Martine, do you guys remember the scenes at all?
Yeah.
So, and this is James Woods. He goes dressed up in a suit, and I think it is comical, because he ends up trying to arrest a couple ladies, and they scream rape and stuff like that. But when you are working the prostitutes, they are street savvy. If they've been around for a while, they know what they're doing. And I just like how, one, I didn't think this was realistic, how Burt Young portrays this Vice cop. They were a little more put together than this. They were a little more professional. When we had downtown Vice, he calls it ad Vice, right? And so our Vice guys came from downtown. And in West Hollywood, the interesting thing is they didn't like downtown Vice coming down. So the deputies at West Hollywood had to do their own Vice operations. I don't know if you got roped into any of those, Cliff.
It was like, first of all, it wasn't my temptation, but number two, there was no way that I would be pulled down a road of going that way with prostitutes, because I dated several female deputies who used to work those stings, and so I think, why do you? And then I became aware of those operations and how they met. People would get swept up in those, but I was always seeing how we used to use the females to get the customers, and on a weekend night they would rack up 20, 30 of these guys, and they would do some mass bookings. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah. I had to work the booking team sometime where you're working the jailer and you're like, oh God, here they come. And you're because we had to roll prints back then. Did you ever work a Vice operation, Ron?
Yeah. So back to not to keep, I didn't live on Long Beach Boulevard, but
I did.
We would actually have major crimes. Moral crew would come out, and like we would book like, I can't even tell you. I would say it was in the hundreds, when they decided to come out and do their thing. One funny story that pops in my head is how they would augment it. And typically they would just want patrol folks there for like room takedown stuff, etc. So they do sex for money at the street. They'd walk back. The second the dude walked in, it'd be like, jigs up, and we'd, maybe have to rat pack the dude or whatever. But most of the time the dude was like, hey, I give up, blah, 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 blah. But one story, a couple stories stand out, but I'll give you one. They used to augment that whole deal. So Major's Morals crew would bring a bunch of I'll just call them cute, pretty, young custody female deputies on board, and then kind of the booking team would be like male deputies from custody, and so that would free us up as patrol guys to work overtime, and then you would kind of be the decision makers, and then they'd have an eye, the girls would be wired, etc., and we would go from there. Well, one of the guys who would go on tons of ride-alongs with me when I worked in the city of Linwood. Great guy. I won't mention his name or whatever, but he's worked at some pretty elite units moving forward. Is he would lived at Century Station, and he was an IRC deputy because he would go on so many rides. So needless to say, I'm actually working the takedown vehicle in case somebody gets in a car and drives off or takes off running, and I'm down around the corner and I hear the eye on the person that has the main surveillance on the front of the location. The eye gets on and says, "Man, we got a runner." And I'm like, "A runner?" And so I'm like, dropping magazines out of my lap and everything. I'm like, "Man, I got to work now." So I peel out onto Long Beach Boulevard and I see this gentleman sprinting down the street, full blast. And I see this other deputy that's worked with me a lot right behind him. So I come up, I pull the car right up next to him. This guy's been running for hundreds of yards now, attempt to detain him at gunpoint, and the dude finally stops and is standing there and isn't aggressive or anything, but is not cooperative. He's not doing what I'm telling him to do. I have him at gunpoint now through the window of the car. And then the young, hard-charging, aggressive, testosterone-filled deputy from custody that was chasing him from down all of a sudden catches up to the problem and proceeds to, in almost WWF type fashion, my recollection of it, WWF type fashion, grabbing this individual and doing some sort of Hulk Hogan-esque maneuver to him in order to take him into custody on the concrete. And the gentleman ended up being a pastor of or deacon, whatever it is you want to call it, of a very well-known church. And that was a whole, there were so many things we had to massage on that it wasn't, but that was a very well-known. So when you talk about people of all walks of life that get wrapped up in this deal, you would think somebody that is presenting themselves in that manner would probably be somebody that would help the solution and not hurt it. But yeah, I had an opportunity to be on a variety of those things, not undercover. I wasn't soliciting sex for, but ancillarily, I was involved in a lot of that stuff.
So what was that Bob Seger song? Here comes the banker in his big old limousine. Here comes the poor man. All you got to have is green. Here comes the baker and the something and the cop. One thing's for certain, ain't never gonna stop. There you go. I went to see Bob Seger on my 60th birthday. Yeah, that's pretty good. Hey, let's roll right into the Roscoe scene. And they do play practicals. This was the one with Ted Tabak, and this is why I did this scene, just because I wanted to talk about Tabak. He's a great character actor. He played it. What was a television show that he? Alice, right? And
it was from Mel's Diner.
Yeah, the diner.
And Mel's
cook.
Diner. Just played Mel. That's right.
No, because I watched it. I'm like, I don't know that dude's name, but that's Mel from Mel's Diner.
Yeah.
Because I'd watched that show as a kid.
And of course, they pull a prank on him, and he if you work West Hollywood at all, trust me, you're going to get hit on, by the boys that come to town. And that's the other thing. When you just talked about the Reverend, there was so much vice going on in West Hollywood, whether it was on the Sunset Strip for the ladies or the boys on Santa Monica. And a certain night of the week, I think it was, I forget the name of the week, the transgenders would show up. It was kind of their night, I guess. And so you had all these different people coming over, and it was the banker, the lawyer, the cop, the actor, you name it. And they got themselves caught up in very interesting situations many times, which is what made West Hollywood a very entertaining place. In my mind, it was like, what are these guys doing to themselves? But that's just West Hollywood, and that's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that's why was it booze, broads, and bills are the things that get you in trouble. And it's definitely the ladies, and certainly sex gets you in trouble on patrol. And here he's just hitting up on them, and he's just messing around with them. And Roscoe gets kind of tough with them. And I can remember I was at West Hollywood, and we were getting a sensitive training thing. And so they brought this guy in to tell us how it was like 85, 86. So this was when this stuff began. They just did incorporation, and we all had to have sensitivity training towards the gay and lesbian community. I don't know if you guys ever had to go through that. That's what we had to go through at West Hollywood at the time. And there were some guys in there like Roscoe Rules. No, it's a sin. It's immorally wrong. And they're yelling and screaming at this guy I think he was like a gay judge or something like that. And but they were like him. They were just stuck on their beliefs. And I'm like, well, why do these guys? I mean, the way I just handle it is, hey, everybody just wants to be treated professionally, and that was easy for me to do. I didn't have a problem with that. But some of these guys, they had a problem with work in the community, and I said, well, and they stayed because it was close to home, or the overtime was good. They weren't there. There were a variety of reasons why they were there, but and I just think this is funny that Roscoe Rule reminds me of some of those guys, just very rigid. Have my opinions, my biases, and this guy's playing on him. He doesn't know he's got this explosive stuff. And I don't know if any of the guys working as, who were put on the streets as tricks ever knowingly got somebody they knew as a cop, but I could see that happening. What'd you think of the scene? Because it's kind of a comedy scene, Cliff.
Yeah, it's just kind of one of those things, man. It goes. I guess they didn't plan it as a prank, but one of those things that goes bad. That's why I never like to get them. Hey, let's do this. It'll be funny. Nah, let's not do that because it could go the other way. But I ended up working as a sergeant in Central Jail. I was on the 56, 5700. So I was at the K11s. They call them their keepaways. They were actually still males, but they, if they came in taking hormones, they looked. They had, yeah. And so I made sure that just because I didn't want those problems, that no one was forced to work those floors if they had any kind of bias against that or religious beliefs that might kind of keep them from treating people fairly. And so I was kind of careful who worked for me on those floors.
I used to work overtime in the hall when it was still open, and they had they called them nuclear tanks. So we used the lingo of the day. And so because you worked West Hollywood, they always put you there because they felt, this guy works with it on the street. He's okay, right? So you end up having to work those situations. But hey, I got to catch up here. So I'm not avoiding you, Ron, here. Let's go on to the next scene right after this. Right after this, Martine, roll right into Officer Gerry and police suicides. And this is the scene where they call in sperm whale, and one of the pictures that was on their honor wall was a police officer who committed suicide. And the new captain decided he didn't want that guy's pictures up there because he didn't lose his life in the line of duty, meaning he wasn't murdered in the line of duty. He actually committed suicide. And sperm whale has a problem with that, and I understand his point. And but the reason why I wanted to do this is because when you're in charge, whether you're a sergeant, lieutenant, or a captain, and you got to do something that is going to go against the grain with your troop, there's a way to do it, and there's a way to not to do it. And I just saw this as the way not to do it. I mean, I don't know what you guys think of that. And as sergeants, you're trying to transmit the information from the top to the troops and make it a little more palatable. But this was just cold, and I don't know. What'd you think, Ron? Have you ever had a really distasteful message that you had to deliver? You may or may not have believed in it, but you had to put your game face on it, and you do it, and you look for a way to deliver it where the troops understand it, right? It's better than this here, anyways. That's how I felt about this, and I think that's what Wamba was getting at. You got to do something, do it. Try to do it a little better than this, and a little more sensitive than this.
Yeah, so just my style on stuff, and there was I don't know what training it was. Maybe it was like middle management school or something, because I kind of did more than just the minimum training, whether it was how to be a better leader or supervisor or tactically or whatever. So, I don't know exactly where I got this training, but I remember an individual that was an executive on, it might have been our department, maybe LAPD, that said, hey, when you have a message to deliver like that, and you're truly somebody that was one of the troops or guys, and now you're in a position of leadership and influence, the very first thing you should ask yourself when you're going to deliver, whether you want to call it the difficult message or whatever it is how would I want to be approached in that particular aspect? And then the other thing that he said, and this never did me wrong, especially when it came to de-escalating some things, because I tend to let deputies speak their mind probably way more than other supervisors, and then I kind of rein it back in a little bit, whether I have to talk to them privately or pull it back, is that remember that that person is a son, a father, whatever it is, and that this is just their job. Okay. And what you're trying to do is in supervising and you're bringing something on high is to either send a message or change a behavior for the positive. So that always served me very, very well when it came to bringing a bad message, etc. Like I can't tell you, like when I became a lieutenant, I don't know if it was just a lieutenant job, but I'd have no idea like these administrative and or criminal investigations were going on. And then the captain would call me in and go, "Hey man, you know what? Could you take this letter out to this dude's house and give him this like 17 days off or what?" And I'm like, okay, sir, 10-4, ma'am. Okay. And I'd go out and do it. And I'd be like, like you said, you're removed from the department. I guess that's just what a lieutenant does. So as that kind of went on, one thing I didn't like about the movie was, one, why did they call Waylon in? Okay, because it almost seemed like they were trying to bait him, despite them having dirt on the other lieutenant with the black prostitute or whatever it was. They were trying to bait him to try to get him in his last 6 months when he's checking out to kind of lose his cool, for lack of a better word. But one thing, that was one. And two was, I didn't like the fact that that they kept saying, the captain said, the captain said, the captain said. I'll be honest with you. One thing that drove me nuts about having, I don't want to call it weak supervisors, but it trickles downhill, and the messaging needs to be loud and clear, because that field sergeant and or that lieutenant at the station that oversees the watch commander that oversees that shift, they're the ones that day in and day out are going to make sure that that is either enforced or monitored, to make sure that that change occurs or behavior occurs. Like one of the really less popular things that pops in my head was the whole seatbelt thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And you know, it is what it is, but you would rely out in the field and at the station to either relay that message and then visually see it in the field. And one of the things that rang true to me, and it hit a nice little spot for me when they brought him in and did that specific to the picture, is when I was at patrol, we had 13 dudes on our wall, okay, that were killed on duty, off duty, as it relates to them executing their police duties, etc. And at one time, and I won't say the captain or anything like that, the captain was going to put in, and it was right in the hallway outside the briefing room. So the point was, what every time you walked down to the watch sergeant's office, every time you walked down to dispatch, every time you walked in to go to the briefing room, you had to pass those men. Okay, their painting that was up there with a brief description of what have occurred. Yeah. And that memorial wall was like, dude, if you mess, like we would have trainees clean it. We wouldn't tell them they had to clean it, but it was like, hey, you dust this, you do this because, you know, it's the right thing to do. If you don't do it, fine, man, we'll find somebody else to do it, but the trustees ain't touching it, the inmate workers, right? Well, the captain at that time came in and said, we're going to move these things because I have a mural or a project that I want to do, and this is taking up space, was going to move it out to the lobby where like the prisoners would get released and the people would come in to make complaints and report their car stolen and everything else. And I would say that very, very quickly they changed that tune.
Yeah.
and that rang true to me. Was I was like, you call me in right now and you're going to tell me we're going to do this. I would tell you right then, I would be like, So there was a whole lot of problems as it related to me, not only as a supervisor, but at the deputy level and as a person that were just like, I've used fundamentally wrong already, but we're just off.
Well, that
in my
was part of
opinion.
actually, as a lieutenant, that's part of your job is to when the leadership is tone deaf, the captain's tone deaf, not understanding. You need to say, you know what this is going to cause, don't you?
Right.
So it does go both ways, and but yeah, sometimes you have to. I mean, sometimes you got to be blunt. Hey, you know what? Overtime, we got to cut overtime. You know, if you guys are, we're going to do these policies to cut overtime. And I always used to say, here's the deal: we got a limited budget. We either cut overtime, or they're going to cut positions down the road, or they're going to cut resources, or whatever it is, and it'll be some specialized unit. And so I say we run a tight ship so that we keep those units, and that's how I used to sell that message. It's like, and I said, hey, plus I'm a taxpayer. I don't mind spending money, but I don't want to spend one dime more than I have to. And if I feel that way about the fire department, I got to feel that way about the sheriff's department. So, you just got to be straightforward with them. That's the other part of this. You can't baby them or infantilize them. They have to give them the straight scoop. I'm catching up on time here, guys. So we're going to roll right into Roscoe rules again. And this is, do you ever work with some guys? Cliff, you ever work with a guy, and go ahead and show this clip, Martine, where they walk into the room and the fight starts? You know what I'm talking about? The deputy that walks in, and every time you're with him, or the fight is going to start because just the way they talk to somebody. And that's what I mean, I think he says, I'll tell you what you're going to do. And, these guys are already heightened. They're already angry, and there's only two of them. That's the other part of this.
Yeah.
And there's a big crowd of them, and he antagonizes this group. But do you ever work with that guy that just, if you're walking into a fight situation where he ain't going to de-escalate, or just the way he conducts himself? I mean, this guy, he's pushing it.
Numerous times. I've worked with people this way. Yes.
Just the way they talk and just the way they walk and the way they carry themselves, the fight is on, and you know it. Did you ever work with that guy?
Yep. Numerous times. Too many, I think. Too many I can count. Yeah.
I mean,
I think Cliff was that guy, Pat.
At one time, I probably was that
probably
guy.
The snippy. Well, I like what you said about de-escalating, Ron, because, after the first fight, you realize, even if you won the fight, that hurt,
Yeah.
And you're going to get in a fight every night, you use the gift of gab to talk people down. And if you can, it's a lot better to talk them to jail, which is, I think, what Randy Quaid's goal was here: talk down the problem than to antagonize it. But Roscoe Rule kind of he pushed. That's why he's got that name. I guess he pushes it, and the fight is on. Right, the fight is on. And I worked with one guy like this, and he always had to have that last word, which just antagonized things. And so we ended up having to take people to jail when we could have just talked it down and just walked away. So, but there are guys like that. And this one guy, I remember I had this complaint, and I got complaints from this guy all the time, and he got tickets. I was a lieutenant. And this gal comes in, and she comes, that deputy, I won't say it, his name sounded like Rude, with a little bit of asterisk on the end. He says, he shouldn't be what his name was. It should be just Deputy Rude. And she just complained. And I always got complaints from him because of just the way he carried himself. And I made him carry a tape recorder. I said, you know what? You can put this tape recorder on, and I'm going to see how you do with the tape recorder. Miraculously, it improved. But so there are guys, they just walk in and their bearing just starts the fight. And that's what I thought about this scene. What do you think, Ron?
I can't say that necessarily that Roscoe's parts of his personality aren't appropriate in those very finite periods of time where you need a ruffian. He just needs to be a little bit more well-rounded, and then, be able to use his gerbil voodoo to like escalate and de-escalate some stuff. But I mean, like Cliff said, and the only reason I did it at Cliff's expense was I can tell you I was way more adept as a young deputy, both at patrol and custody, as being able to push people's buttons and escalate it so that we could do the things that we wanted to do as deputies. And it took me a while to develop hey dude, let's talk him into handcuffs and do it that way. I've worked with tons of folks, but like I said previous, there's parts of me sprinkled into every one of these characters, short of the dude that was doing drugs on duty and getting whipped by a dominatrix. That part I don't identify with, but all the other stuff I was pretty much. I'm like, dude, I could totally see that in me, or I could totally see that guy. So yeah, I concur with what Cliff said, and kind of that once you saw that one person that was there, if I didn't have the handle on the call as, like, you know, the bookman, I would step way back in the back and be like, hey, let him work his magic and go from there. So
let me
that's just my 2 cents.
And a dose of reality. Even the department evolved. If I go back to 1984 with the sheriff's department, let's say I come into Men's Central Jail with a pretty good personality, and I can talk to people and get them to do things, you know, without trouble. That there was a culture there that would have been looked down upon as a weakness. And I mean, I remember being on training at CJ, and you know, hey, you're going to start a fight today in the chow hall. You're going to fight. This was the culture. So, you know, I mean, we evolved from there, but there was a time when it certainly, you know, having things go normal wasn't really supported. If you want to be honest, I mean,
I was in the academy. I don't know if I told this story to you guys, but they asked who's been involved in the fight. And of course I raised my hand, you know, and and I was surprised only a third of the people had been involved in a fight or who's been involved in more than one, and my hand's still up. All right, who's been involved in more than okay, my hand's still up, man. And I'm thinking, who the hell are they?
They're going to target you.
So for me, I never really, I didn't feel like, you know, I'm like, hey man, you get hurt getting in fights. I just want and I came on at 21, so I was pretty young, but you know, there was kind of a rite of passage growing up in Detroit, and you did mix it up every now and then as a teen, but a lot of these guys hadn't had that experience, and so I could tell you, I really never felt like I needed to prove anything to anybody.
No,
but let's from this scene, let's roll into Avoid the Babes, because I really want to get into the scene where the young officer hooks up with the dominatrix, and he's caught in this situation with this dominatrix by his friends, and he's using drugs, and it's the Perry King character, and he's getting whipped, and you know this culture. I mean, I've never seen a situation where a police officer, but this culture does exist. Dominatrix. Man, and they had dominatrix in West Hollywood, right? That's where you went, whatever sex you wanted in West Hollywood. And so this lifestyle does occur, and I don't really understand the psychology behind it. I can understand this guy's character. I forget his name now as an actor, but where you find your partner in this very compromising situation, and you're torn. He knows the right thing to do is to report him, because he's the problem. He doesn't do that, but he's also he sees the vulnerability in this guy as a human being, and he's motivated by that. And we see that a lot when people, not necessarily officers, but people are in desperate situations. We see that pain in them coming out, and I kind of see that in this particular scene. He's in immense pain, whatever it is. We don't know what his background is. And it's playing out for his partner right here. Yeah, what'd you think of that? I thought this was one of the powerful scenes in the movie. Cliff, what do you think?
Yeah, and it reminds me of 7733 Santa Monica Boulevard. If you remember, we had this big, huge sex store called the Pleasure Chest.
Yeah.
And people would come from all over because they would sell greeting cards that were kind of, you know, funny and humorous. But I was so shocked to see in there. I mean, they would have mannequins of full, you know, police uniforms, CHP, LAPD, and whips and chains and headgear, and, you know, the whole thing that I had no exposure to in upstate New York. So definitely that culture is like in West Hollywood. That was the appetite for some people, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, Ron, what did you think of the scenes? Because what I saw was it's Baxter Slade as the character, the pain in his face of what he's tormented by, these whatever demons that are in him, and police officers end up seeing people as they struggle with those things that torment them. We're the ones who end up showing up. We're the ones, whether it's a police officer going through it or a regular citizen, we end up seeing that, and we end up having to triage till they can get
Right,
help,
yeah.
right? Did you see that in the scene at all?
Yeah, I mean, all the other kind of weird stuff with it, I guess, for lack of a better word, I thought that was, like you'd said, one of the more impactful scenes in the movie. Um, how I'm looking at it is not so much with the police, with the public, but the dynamic between partner to partner.
Yeah.
Like somebody that you sit near in briefing and you know. And one of the unique things, and I think we've hit all around it without getting into all the specifics about what we could have done better, or times we had, maybe lost our temper or something like that. But you see the best and the worst of the people that you go 10-8 with, that you go to work with and everything. And how many times have you had to intercede for your partner, say like a Roscoe type dude, and how many times they've had to intercede with you in those one or two times. So with that, and again, I guess maybe back in the 70s, like deviant sexual behavior was like very, how should we say, frowned upon by management or whatever. So maybe that was the big embarrassment. But you can see that probably because of the drug use and everything, if I'm putting myself in that character of what is it, Slate, if I'm putting myself in that character, I'm looking at it from a variety of things. One, what you do in the bedroom, whatever, man. I mean, you're getting whipped by a chick and, she's beautiful and everything. Hey, if that's what you're about, cool. Okay, cool, man. I'm down. I'm okay with that. I'm not judging. Okay, trust me. I'm a little bit more reserved in that area of my life, but hey, dude, do your thing, man. Okay.
Yeah.
But where I see this dynamic is that now he's compromised because of his drug
Right.
use.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
one. So if we're truly seekers of truth and justice, that guy's off the reservation. And maybe I'm being a little creatively outside the boundaries, but if he's this good Jesuit, school kid, etc., that I'm gonna say that he's feeling a tremendous amount of guilt and shame, character-wise, and what
Yeah.
he's struggling with, and that's why I don't know if we're gonna like do a spoiler, but that's ultimately why I think, or was one of the main driving forces, is that he was ashamed that his partners had to see that it was a little bit too much, and two, he was struggling with that relationship with God and ultimately felt so guilty that it was kind of the unforgivable sin. I don't know what a Jesuit is, but if you're just talking religious and your relationship with God, that he was struggling so bad with it that he thought it was unrecoverable, and that's ultimately why he shot himself and commits suicide. And I know I'm probably being a little bit creatively lenient there, but if I was to put myself in that character, that's probably where I would come from. But I thought of it more of the dynamic of the partner to the partner, where the one dude was like, dude, I'm not agreeing with this, but tell you what, I ain't going to say anything. And then you can see later on in the movie where James Wood ultimately picks up on it when they're at MacArthur Park, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, dude, it was him that was in. It was Slate that was in that room at the time." And you see how that whole dynamic plays out. But I saw it more of the partner for the partner, looking out for them, and I think that that's something where people had done it for me. I'd seen it from supervisor to other folks, not only with substances and alcohol, but other things, and I think our department could do that better. At least my recollection of it. I don't know what they're doing now, but that's how I saw it.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, a couple of things I want to address, and then we'll get on to our last couple scenes. First of all, if you want to hear something about Soros, one of our commenters said that you got to watch my other show, Briefing with the Chief, on Wednesdays, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on KJIDB.com. I talk about him a lot because I'm really sick and tired of these Soros-funded DAs. Anyway, so one of the things you talked about, I think the audience might want to hear is, we did go through a time on the department where we learned that part of officer safety is stepping in and helping your partner out when they are crossing a boundary. Maybe their buttons get pushed, because we are human. It happens, right? And you're supposed to step in and calm it down and maybe just take the lead dealing with whoever is pushing your partner, right? So that's true. The other thing is what alcoholism is probably the closest we can talk about in terms of people crossing boundaries that get them into trouble. That is widespread, that we saw with Baxter Slade here, is they're troubled and we're not seeing the signs, and maybe we could have interceded sooner. Although we did see it with Baxter, because he was playing with the gal at the strip joint, and Waylon says, "Don't do that, dude. This isn't good," right? And but Baxter Slade, the other thing is, Baxter Slade did commit suicide in this movie after this scene, and of course it depresses all of his folks. And here's the thing about this: we saw in November 5 or maybe 4 deputy sheriffs or department personnel from our old department commit suicide in a 24-hour period. So we don't know the pain that they were going through, and that's the other part of having to deal with the streets, is you never really know the impact of what people go through in terms of post-traumatic stress injuries, and how it manifests itself, whether they start using drinking alcohol, taking drugs, or they partake in other vices to ease their pain. Certainly suicide becomes one of them. So this is, and this is what I liked about Wallenbaugh. He made sure that people understood there is a cost to being a police officer or deputy sheriff, and most people don't know that cost. Let's roll right into Flashback. I think this is important because it also speaks to post-traumatic stress injury. And this is, they're kind of partying or drinking their sorrows away after Baxter Slade died. They're in MacArthur Park. I don't think that would have been a place that I would have been partying even in the 70s, certainly not now. There's a lot of places you can go that are a lot safer. And I know that the guys at West Hollywood did get in some choir practice and got into a lot of trouble on I forget the name of the street, but it was the top. You go all the way to the end of this street and there's a cul-de-sac, and they said they were going to call the cops. And of course the deputy says, "We are the cops." And then the cops really did come, because they were I think a U.S. attorney and somebody else who, a couple that, and they all got in trouble for their choir practice. But they're drinking, and they put one of the characters in the back of a van, and he has a flashback while drinking, and he ends up shooting somebody by accident. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the flashback, and certainly you guys can chime in, is we do live with our memories of what we experienced on the job, right, Ron? Those come back, and you never know when they're going to come back. But that's a reality, depending on what you've been through in your career, whether it's police or military, right?
Yeah, no, I'm in absolute agreement, and those things, at least as it relates to my experience, and I would say I'm very well adjusted, is that there's certain things I'll avoid or seek out based off of previous experience as it relates to jobs. There's places I avoid and everything based off of I would just say the emotion that's associated with that memory.
Yeah.
And that's what I'll do. And I don't want to get too psychobabbly or whatever, but I believe in going back and timeline therapy wise, if it is a very negative emotion, being able to attach a positive emotion to it in order to process that. And I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, so don't follow anything that I say. I am familiar with that stuff, but yeah, I mean, your memories are what they are, and we attach emotions to them, and ultimately that's who we become as people later on in life.
I was I comment on another radio platform, TNT Radio, where I give conservative commentary or expert commentary. In fact, I'm going to be on there Friday. I'm not sure what they want me to talk about yet, and they asked me to comment on the shooting in Nashville, Tennessee, right? And so I did the day of the shooting, and then they asked me to watch the video and come back on the next day. And I was watching the video, the body cam video, and I had put it on my TV, my big screen TV, and man, I had the flood of emotions. Like I was right there. These body cam footage where these guys are rushing, because they're rushing to the shooter, and there's 4 or 5 guys. Some of them have just their handguns, others have long rifles, and the shooting is going on. She is shooting at the cops as they drive up. It's on, and it's real, and all that emotion came back to me as I watched that body cam footage of the Carson Lobby shooting and other shootings that I've been at or near as they were going on, Cliff. And we experienced that, right? I don't know if you ever watched body cam footage and had that happen to you.
Yeah.
But the emotion just floods back. And when I saw this scene, that's what I thought of.
Well, neuroassociative conditioning is a real thing. Anchoring is a real thing. And when you have strong emotions and it's a significant emotional event that is really registered, kind of anchored in the brain, and something later triggers that same memory. They call it sense memory in like acting school. It just brings it back to the point. You actually, like you said, you're actually reliving or re-feeling those things. Your body's even reacting as if it's happening again.
Yep.
And like Ron said, there's you don't have to be a doctor to really kind of employ some tactics into kind of reframing that memory. That's a really positive thing that you can do, and something very powerful. But I'm with you, and that's kind of why I don't like. I always, these people that love these true crime things. I understand it, but it's like I'm always reliving some memory, so I don't like to watch it. Like, well, that's not so glamorous when you're just sitting there.
Yeah.
And so I'm into like, I'm into true stories, but not really into like true murder. I don't know.
Well, if I had a message for the coppers out there, don't use alcohol to deal with that.
No.
Just go have a conversation with a friend, or realize it's just something that I think people with conscience end up having post-traumatic stress, because they feel guilt. They feel like they should have been able to do something. And lots of times our feelings are the failure of being able to stop it. Because even though they took that shooter out, it was after they killed 9 people, right? Including 4 kids, right? So, I mean, they did the right thing, but that's just how I felt at that time, because having been there before. And we're running out of time here. We got one more show, and this is Pressing the Weak Link. And we've seen this when the department puts everybody under investigation, and you have a lot of people now. The shooting has happened. You got an innocent kid who's dead, and they're trying to figure out how it happened. The officers are kind of closing ranks. Now, I thought this was, and I know on our department, we'd have a flood of people there. There wouldn't be any effort by these guys to be successfully closing ranks on something like this. We would be all over it, but this was a different time, and maybe they were a little more laxed at it in the 70s when Wamba was writing. But they go right after Wayland. They threaten his pension, and he ends up rolling and giving it up. And to some degree, he was kind of leading the charge on pushing back against management. Had he been a little more responsible, maybe it wouldn't have got so bad. He was kind of pushing the drinking, and but then he ended up rolling over, which is one of the things I always say. Hey, you know what? When you're threatened, these guys kind of come together as clique. When you're threatened, here's what happens. You get fired, and suddenly you're the leper. Nobody wants to have anything to do with you, or if they do, it's going to be quietly. They don't want anybody to know, right? And I'll tell you, I was going to call, who was it? It was Ray Leva got fired by Villanueva, and Ray and I were tight. And I told my boss, hey, I'm going to call that guy up and tell him, hey, to ask to see how he's doing. And I got told, don't do it. If the sheriff finds out, he'll go after you, right? And so, right, I mean, that's happened. And
say it ain't so.
But that happens. You become, when you're out publicly out, you become the leper, and people aren't sure, because actually most of the copper's identity is tied up with being that deputy sheriff. And suddenly when that's threatened, that attacks what it's really all about, and that's that identity, not necessarily the group that they're in. I mean, that's kind of how I felt about it. They eventually they came back and pressed the guy to get, it was unrealistic, press the chief to lower the discipline. But that does happen. They do go after the weak link, right, Ron? And as tight as you are as a group, somebody's going to roll, because their livelihood's on. And the best advice we can give the cops out there is don't get yourself in these situations. What do you think?
Well, this will probably be shocking to the audience, but we don't necessarily make the best decisions that we can when we're under the influence of alcohol, off duty, and parks in the wee hours of the morning with I don't know if they're prostitutes or waitresses or what they are, but that doesn't happen. But I mean, I would say this, and the only time I ever did a day off was for management, or I should say mismanagement of a pursuit. And I would like to say that and that was as a lieutenant. I was a very healthy risk taker as a deputy. But the only thing that kept me in it was that I wasn't doing stupid stuff off duty. But Reader's Digest version, one of the best things that I ever heard as it related to being under administrative investigation for your policy violations was the best thing you had going for you, even despite your attorney, were the IA investigators, because they weren't real investigators. They didn't have a lot of experience. They didn't have that kind of stuff. And they would use the tactic of getting all angry and screaming and yelling at you and threatening you and everything else. And the younger deputy you are, the better. One thing about this, so they use the same investigative things. They try to press and press and press. And they used Wayland's, he has a couple months and, hey, bro, I'll do this and do that for you, and you could do this. One thing that, at least for me, experience wise, when he does roll, is or basically tells the story, after he had already removed himself and supposedly everybody was going to protect him and he wasn't even involved. I'm not saying stick to the story, but if I was him, I would have just been like, hey, man, I wasn't there. Whatever the story was that they were, it would have been very easy for him to quite literally plead the fifth. So with that, I would just say that my experience with Lou Gossett Jr. writing him a letter saying, I understand why you did it. In my world, I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Not that I don't want the truth to come out, but I wouldn't have understood how he flipped on everybody after everybody concocted this big story. My attitude towards him would be a little bit different. But I see we're close to time off, so I'll end with that.
Well, we'll let. Hey, Cliff, what do you think of the scene? Well, the whole thing. Of course they're going to press the weakest guy, the guy that has the most to lose, and they're going to roll. Somebody's going to roll.
Yeah, they're obviously going to go with leverage. Who do I have leverage on? Who's going to have the motivation to come clean here? And so they're going to use that as a pry bar to get to what they want to get after. So yeah, that was the low hanging fruit. There was to go after him and his pension and hang that over his head and use it as leverage.
Well, I will say the best thing you can do is just be a good sergeant lieutenant and be proactive in dealing with these guys so they don't end up in these situations, is kind of the way I would say it. Thank you guys for coming on the show. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We've had a bunch of folks that have stayed with us, Lady, Penny, and Antes and Concon, I think. I can't remember the name now, but thank you for joining us again. You guys stick around for a quick debrief, and Martin, I think we are done. You can take it away.
Thank you.